This is not a social commentary on any programs or anything like that. This is God talking to his people. Be kind to those that need it. Why? Because you were once bondmen. Also, they were going into a land. Who was blessing them with that land, by the way? Who allowed the land to prosper, by the way? And so, again, they were not creating this land that flowed with milk and honey. They were not giving it to themselves. They were being given. And so, in the same way, give and be kind toward another. Because really, all any person is a steward over the things that God provides anyway. And so they were to remember this. And God says at the end of this verse, this is not just a suggestion. This is not just something good they could choose to do or not. At the end of verse 22, it says, therefore, I command thee to do this thing. This wasn't optional. They didn't have the will to say, or they didn't have the option to say, rather, no, I don't want to do this. I want to enrich myself later on. Jesus would talk about covetousness. And he gave an example of a man who had so much wealth. And he said, look at how much I've got. I'm going to tear down my old barns and build bigger barns. I'm going to say, look at all that I have done. Was there anywhere a thought of the poor, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow? In that particular example, there wasn't. There wasn't any, at least expressed gratitude toward God. And God wanted his people to never get that way. God, again, as we've talked about week after week, God wants his people in every dispensation to model him and his nature. God is benevolent, therefore his people should be benevolent. God is kind and merciful, therefore his people should be kind and merciful. God is also just. God wants his people to be just. And so having balance in the way that we live and treat one another, that was what he wanted them to do there. And so as they were to go through, leave something for others is basically. Now, it wasn't that they were supposed to gather it all, work themselves, and go and dole it out to people. That wasn't the case. Leave it so that others could come and work themselves and glean the food and have something to provide for themselves. Any thoughts or comments there at the close of chapter 24? Sure, they were expected to do something themselves. Now, and even in that, you still see grace at work, but you still see work at work. Did they plant the field? No. But were they going to be able to benefit if they put forth some effort from that same field? Absolutely. And you see that model throughout the scriptures also. Does man create salvation? Absolutely not. But is there a part that man plays so that he may take part in the salvation that God provides? Absolutely. It's that same principle throughout the scriptures. Any other thoughts or comments? Exactly. It was a gift. There was something that they did to be able to enjoy it, but that didn't mean they earned it. As Brother Boyd, so yeah, you can go out and pick some grapes. That you don't sit back and say, look at all I've done to now enjoy these grapes. No, you just walked over and you grabbed a couple, and so that was the idea there, not anything more than that. Any other thoughts, comments? All right, let's go right into chapter 25. Again, here are laws that relate to how people interact with other people. Verse 25, or chapter 25 rather, verse 1 begins, if there be a controversy between men, and they come unto judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judges shall cause him to lie down, and to be beaten before his face, according to his fault, by a certain number. 40 stripes he may give him, and not exceed. Lest, if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee. Okay, excuse me. Here, if there is some sort of argument, dispute between brothers, this person says this person says that, it'll come before the judges. Once the judges determine what the truth or the reality of the situation is, The one who was found to be wicked deserves a proper punishment. Verse 2 there, it says, and the end of verse 1, it shall justify the wicked, or the righteous rather, justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked be worthy to be beaten, the judge calls him to lie down and be beaten before his face. So what we're seeing here is that God wanted justice to be balanced and fair, but he wanted it to be meted out. See, there isn't, well, if I really like the guy, and if he's my friend, my neighbor, my brother, my sister, my dad, my son, go easy. There was a place for mercy. There always was a place for mercy. But there is also an appropriate place for justice. If not, then there is no such thing as justice. There's no balance. There has to be justice in order for there to be mercy. Because mercy is withholding justice that's due at times. And if there is no justice, then there can't be no mercy. So in essence, what God is saying is when it's appropriate, mete out justice. What does that do? Could you imagine if there's a child who does something wrong, and every time he or she does something wrong, the parent says, well, you deserve to get it, but not this time. And then the next time the child does it again, and you say, well, you deserve to be punished or to be disciplined, but not this time. They'll never learn. What is that child going to learn then? Though they're going to learn something, they're going to learn the right lesson, but what do you think they will learn then? I'm going to keep doing it because there are no real consequences. There's no respect then for the authority. And so there has to be true justice for there to be a respect for authority. And so God wanted his people to demonstrate true justice. Now look at verse 3 there. It says, 40 stripes he may give him and not exceed. Do you remember in the New Testament, Paul in 2 Corinthians talked about being beaten? Do you remember what Paul said? He used a very unique phrase. 40 stripes save one. Anybody know why the Jews did 40 stripes save one? Which would mean minus one. In case of miscount, they didn't want to go over. The Sadducees, if I'm not mistaken, were the ones that kind of allowed this to take place, to save one part of it. What the goal was, they wanted to obey God's word. They didn't want to go over. But what happened was that over time, the exception or their protective rule became law to them. So they made the rule take away one, which God didn't say, but they made that a law amongst them. It was a nice thing to not want to go over, but when we make a new rule to protect God's rule, that's not sanctioned by God. For example, we're supposed to worship on the first day of the week, correct? If the eldership says everybody come on the last day of the week so that we don't miss the first day of the week, we're going to start worship on Saturday so that we absolutely don't miss Sunday. Now, their idea may be right to protect the sanctity of New Testament worship on the first day of the week, but it's not biblical to do that. The reason I mention that is sometimes there are things that come from a good heart and good motivation, but if it's not what God said, then it's going beyond, which 1 John chapter 3 says, is to go beyond God's law, to transgress God's law it's a sin. Now, they were trying to do what was right and trying to protect it, but when you make that rule or law, it's not what God said. So they were supposed to give 40 stripes. Now, some of them would stop at 39 because they had some history records that they had a cord that had, or a beating implement that had 3 cords on it. And so if each one of them would count as 1, so if you hit a person with it once, that's actually 3. And so they would hit you 13 times with it, which would be 13 times 3, 39, and so they would stop there. I don't know that was always the case. Maybe that's how they got to 39, maybe, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting history. But whatever the case, the Bible, God says, look, don't go past 40 times. if this person is to be beaten, then thy brother should seem violently. If you beat them excessively, there's this view. It takes away from the brotherhood that they would have, the fellowship they have, the humanity they might share together. And so God says, don't do that. Don't go beyond these 40 stripes. Give out the justice that's due, but don't go beyond that. Yes, it doesn't give, this passage does not give room for some delayed sentencing or delayed meting out of the justice. It seems to be right back to back to back. But whatever the case, the judges were to judge fairly. The righteous person would be justified. The wicked person would be condemned. The punishment was to be meted out in front of the judge that caused him to be beaten, and he would receive his 40 stripes. Any other thoughts or comments there? Exactly. I think that would allow, as Brother Terrell said, if anybody didn't hear it, the judge was not disassociated. Once he called out the judgment, the beating had to take place in front of him. So he couldn't say, yeah, Brother Marshall's in trouble, and then he, turn his back and not see it. No, he has to watch this. So he could see the pain and the agony that's inflicted on his brother. And that would maybe bring some compassion that he might not be so quick with judgment or imbalanced, unfair. He would make sure that if a person gets that beating, he actually deserves it. So he would likely hear all the evidence and hear it well and judge wisely and righteously. So this wasn't to be just a rash judgment where he could excuse himself from the judgment here. Verse 4, thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn. This is a basic principle. If you are using an animal to tread out this corn, and if he were to try to eat a little bit, let him eat a little bit. He's working on it, and so you don't muzzle him so he can't partake. So he was able to partake from the work that he was actually doing. That's the same principle Paul would later use in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 to demonstrate that he and others were worthy to be supported financially for their work in the gospel. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 9 and 14. Paul uses this same principle. He, in that illustration, being the ox, saying, if I'm working for the gospel, verse 14, then I of the gospel should be supported. And so he used that same biblical principle to demonstrate that he and I believe Barnabas had the scriptural right to be supported by the congregations. And they were, by Philippi most prominently, but others in Macedonia and other places as well. Verse 5. Verses 5 through 10 is one section that deals with marriage and almost what's the word I want to say? Lineage and birthright property and that whole nine. Let's look at this. If a brother or if brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. So there's some language in there we don't necessarily use today. So he's just saying, listen, if there's a group of people that live together, they're all family, and there's a man and a woman married, and the man dies, that lady's not going to go out and marry a stranger. That means a non-Hebrew person. She's to marry one of her deceased husband's brother. And that brother is going to perform what it says, the duty of a husband's brother unto her. So if the man dies, the duty of the husband's brother that's deceased was to marry her and bring forth children in that deceased husband's name so that they can have a person to pass down his property, his land to, so that name would not just vanish out amongst the children of Israel. Verse 6. And it shall be that the firstborn which he bears shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, and that his name be not put out of Israel. So again, this man who bears a son to the wife, and then it will be in the name of the deceased husband. So that child that's born would basically be the offspring of the deceased husband, as it relates to this context here. Verse 7, and if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up unto the gate, unto the elders, and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak unto him, and if he stand to it and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, so shall it be done unto the man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the man of him that hath his shoe loosed. This is very different from what we would see practiced today. What does all of this mean? When the children of Israel went into Canaan, God assigned that each of them would have a parcel of land. That parcel of land was to be identified by name, tribe, lineage. So you could identify, I am of this tribe, I'm of the son of this person, the son of that person, and so on. As you see, even the lineage of Christ is delineated for us in the book of Matthew and in Luke. And so they were able to show who was whom, even when it came to who was the Levite could serve in that capacity. And so the names need to be preserved. So if his husband had died, there needs to be a person in his stead that can carry his name forward so the land can stay assigned to the group to whom it's supposed to be assigned. And so if for whatever reason the husband's brother chooses, I don't want to marry her, maybe, well, whatever, for whatever reason, we'll just keep it generic, for whatever reason he chooses not to marry her, then that woman would go to the elders of the city in verse 7, and she would go to the gate unto the elders of the city, and she would make this accusation and say, hey, my husband's brother won't perform the duty of the brother of the husband, and he's not going to raise up children unto my deceased husband. And so the elders would go and get this brother. And verse 8, it says, and they shall call him. They're going to speak unto him. And if he stands to it, if he says, yeah, you're absolutely right, I'm not going to do it. Then verse 9 says, the brother's wife is going to come in the presence of the elders. So again, as Brother Terrell alluded to earlier, there's no excusing oneself from this judicial process. So if the brother admits in front of the elders of the city that I'm not going to marry this lady, I will not raise seed unto her, then the brother's wife is going to come in the presence of the elders. She's going to take off his shoe from his foot and spit in his face and answer, so shall it be done to this man that build out his brother's house. This was a defilement for him not to do this. There was a responsibility that he had. This was a role that he was to fulfill. Now, we don't know under what circumstances he would choose not to take his wife. Maybe she was not attractive to him. Maybe he could have already been married. We're not really sure what all the circumstances would have been. But whatever the case, there was a responsibility for the brother to raise up seed. Now, well, see, that was another thing that I couldn't really nail down as I tried to figure it out. What would happen then to the property? So, for example, if a man raises up a child with the brother's wife, that child would then be sole heir of all that belonged to his deceased father. So then if the brother is standing there saying, well, I'm coming to make this baby that's going to raise up and own all this stuff, what will happen to my name? So maybe he would say, well, I don't want to do it because what about my offspring? Was it the case that this first child would be raised up, and then maybe the second child he could start, maybe you'd separate the property before the marriage and after the marriage, and it likely would have been a big deal. Maybe he would have been thinking, well, maybe this lady's barren, so I'm going to be with her, and then I'm going to end up dying, not having any children and offspring for myself. There's a lot of speculation as to what was going on. I even read, it's kind of interesting, that if a man married a woman that his brothers thought was undesirable, before they got married, they would tell the brother to go and get himself checked out physically so he would outlive the rest of them, so they wouldn't have to marry her. Now, I don't know if that practice was, legitimate or not, if it actually went on, but I thought that was kind of funny. They'd say, hey, before you marry her, go get checked out, Yes, sir. I am not sure at this exact moment. What's that? I want to look at Ruth. Let's see. There's 3 and 4. I was thinking. Ruth 4:10. Let's see. Ruth 4:10. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off among his brethren in the gates of this place. Ye are witnesses this day. Let's see. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. Yeah, I want to look at this a little bit more. I thought about that this morning, chapters 3 and 4. But I want to look at that a little bit more before I give an answer. At this exact second, I'll just say I can't say precisely the circumstances. There was another incident in the book of Genesis, which may be the reason for this law that we're reading about in Deuteronomy. If you all remember a man, Onan, that was supposed to take his brother's wife, and it seemed that he wanted the pleasures of marriage without the responsibility of rearing a child unto his wife. And that's in Genesis 28, if I'm not mistaken. This seems like it would have been a marriage. Let's see. That may be the most reasonable explanation of this. It seems like this was an actual marriage. Verse 5, her husband brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife. So it likely wasn't just the bearing the child, because then that would have left her, I guess, uncared for as a widow. There's a lot of, I mentioned Genesis 28, it's Genesis 38 where we find Onan. 38, beginning of verse 8, it says, and Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed unto his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. In that case, it seems that he gave the illusion, okay, I'm going to marry her and raise up children to her. But then when it came time to actually do that, he said, well, no, I'm not going to do it. And so he wanted to enjoy the pleasures of marriage without the responsibility of bearing a child to his brother. And so God took that very seriously. Not only did he not fulfill the law that God wanted us to bring up seed, but he also tried to be sneaky and slick and say that he was going to do it, but then kind of back out on it at the very end and not fulfill that. And so God slew him. And it's not just the fact, I don't believe that he would have said that, no, I don't want to marry her, like we're seeing here in Deuteronomy 25. But it was the case that he gave the illusion that he was going to do that and thus lied. He didn't want to do it at all. Any other thoughts or comments? Sure. Sure. Yeah, the firstborn will receive the double portion. That may have played into it as well. If this is the younger brother, then the older brother has to marry. Then what of his? What of his possessions? Yes, sir, sister. Or yes, ma'am, sister. I'm sorry. There's a lot of question around that. I would assume that was not in God's plan. Okay, but I would stop short of making too much implication there. Just me personally, the only thing that we can say, it seems that there's a direct line, is the fulfillment that he refused to fulfill the this role that he pretended to want to take up. And so that we can say is at least certain in that passage. The other parts of it, I think may have some credibility, but I would hate to be, nothing hard and fast with that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There are all sorts of arguments about contraception based on that passage. I don't know that argumentation can be made from that passage. Okay, you had something else? It seems that in Deuteronomy 25 that she's having no children. Because it starts off in verse 5, if brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child. And so that seems to be the preface there, that she doesn't have any children yet. So if she does have children, as you mentioned, that may just be a moot point. It doesn't apply at all in that case. Yes, ma'am. Any other? I thought I saw somebody else. Mm-hmm. It did. I thought about that if it just had to be kind of the large connected family. What if you moved away? What if people start to spread out a little bit? Does it not apply? I'm unsure. I'll tell you, there's a lot in there that I can guess at, but I'm just uncertain for sure exactly what's happening. But whatever the case, there was a serious responsibility, and if it wasn't kept, then that man who didn't fulfill that would be looked down upon. And God wasn't going to be pleased with it, and so he was to be marked, to be identified, not having a shoe. And if you look at what's happening, the widow is going to take off his shoe and spit in his face in front of the elders of the city, so that this would be identified. It was kind of a heavy consequence. At any rate, verse 11, when men strive together, one with another, and the wife of the one draws near to deliver her husband out of the hand of him that smiteth him, and putteth forth her hand, and taketh him by the secrets, then thou shalt cut off her hand, thine eye shall not pity her. This is a situation where two men are having some sort of combative argumentation, and the wife sees, hey, I want to help my husband. And the way that she chooses to help him, in this passage God's saying it shouldn't be, is to take the other person by his secrets, which we can all understand what that means. If not, get a different version of the Bible. It'll probably explain it. Anyway, if she were to do that, to grab this person by his secrets, it says that her hand should be cut off and he should not pity her. God wanted the people to be able to continue to grow, multiply, be prosperous. And so that wasn't the way that people were supposed to fight. That was off limits. So the wife wasn't to come and to damage a person so that he couldn't continue to have offspring. And if that were the case, if she inserted herself in that particular way, then there were consequences. She were to have her hand cut off. And then it says you should not pity her. Justice at times can seem heavy and harsh. And God wants it to be recognized, and not only that, but to be respected. Don't pity her. You remember back there in the book of Leviticus, Nadab and Abihu, they offer fire that's not authorized by God. God strikes them down. And what does God say to their father about that whole thing? Anybody remember? Do not mourn for them in front of the people. Don't do it. Don't get out there and make this big show. Oh, my poor boys. Oh, look at my poor boys. No, don't you dare do that. Why? Because they had sinned in the role of a priest in front of the people. God wanted justice to be seen and respected so that others wouldn't do it. But if there was this big show of pity and shame, oh, why did that happen to my boys? Oh, they were such good boys. They only did this one thing. Then the people might say, yeah, that's right. Sin isn't that bad. We should feel bad for them that sinned. No. Sin has to be punished, no matter who does it. Nobody's forced to sin. This woman would not have been forced to intervene. Of course, any wife would want to help her husband, but there was a way, I guess, in which that wasn't to be done. And when justice was to be meted out, it wasn't to be pitied, or the person wasn't to be pitied. They would receive whatever justice was appropriate, and the people had to respect it. In the same way now, has anybody ever heard, but why would some people end up lost? Oh, if God is loving, why would he cause people to be lost? Does God make anybody lost? Not at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. God went through the greatest length to make sure that everyone could be saved. And so just think about that principle. The consequence may seem extreme or harsh in our sight. But thank God that he has greater wisdom than we do, and he chooses what is appropriate. And it's our job to respect a God who can see the hearts of men. It's our job to respect a God who can see and understand justice in a way that you and I never could. And so knowing that he is loving and merciful, kind, just, fair, and all the rest of the adjectives that could apply to him, we trust his judgment and know that his way is going to be the right way. Did you have your hand? No? Okay. Okay. I think it would probably dual. It would have been indecent for sure. I also think that God was very concerned with it seems that God was very concerned with lineage being, for example, God wanted certain lines of people diluted so they didn't exist anymore. To the 10th generation we read a couple of chapters ago, don't let you make sure this group of people's bloodline is out. And he wanted his people to continue to grow more numerous and more numerous. So that was a thing that was a big deal. Also, if a person was maimed in his secrets or private places, then that person wasn't to come into the service of the temple. So that was something that was important to God. And so this would have been very much indecent, but it also would have damaged the ability to continue to produce offspring, which it seems that God did not want to have happen. So we've exhausted our time. We'll pick up here at verse 13, if the Lord's will, next week. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? No? Okay. If you are a daily person of prayer or scripture reading, remember those sheets of paper that are out in the foyers and even in the other building, and check them off so we can just kind of keep a tally at what's going on here in the congregation. So we'll be dismissed now to the bottom of the hour.